Yeah, I would encourage you guys too. You always say have a unified front, right? As parents, but also leaning into your strengths as father and mother, right? So we kind of have this ongoing understanding that I'm the enforcer, like because they will just they will argue and ask, and if they're not arguing or asking, they're finding another way to try to get what they want, and it just wears my wife down. And so she just got. I just at one point I was like, listen, I can see this is causing you a lot of like you're not just physically tired, but you're emotionally just completely waxed because these kids are relentless, and there's 4-on-1. So I said, because she'll feel bad. She'd be like, I feel bad because I asked them to go feed the dog and they argued and then they were whining. I was like, I'll just get it done. And I'm like, no, they need to feed the dog. Like that's their job. And I have no emotional like reservation in like enforcing. Like, I do not care. And so that gave her a lot of permission to just say, all right, I'm gonna get your dad. I work from home, so I can be available on most days, all day. But I thought that was helpful for us when she finally felt like she could just let me be the enforcer. And they started to respect her a lot more.
And Ryan, there's a lot of fascinating science behind that. There's a bunch of research that's been done on
Mm-hmm.
couples. And interestingly, when the mom is the enforcer, which is the much more common situation in
Mm-hmm.
America, 80% of marriages, the mom is the enforcer and the dad just kind of is the fun guy who does whatever he wants.
Mm-hmm.
And when the dad is actually willing to go in and be an authoritative parent, the kids do a lot better.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
there's not just biblical reasons for it, but there's science behind it
Yeah.
showing that if as a man, and this is me talking to myself, if you just want to go with the flow and you don't necessarily gravitate towards leadership and the idea of chastising your wife or your children is anathema to you, get over that because you have to be
Yeah.
willing to let your children know when they're making a mistake and go jump in there and do that for your wife because you can't leave all of that on her. That
Yeah.
is negligent as a dad to make your wife do all of the enforcement work.
Yeah, man. Yeah, good word and sobering. And it's funny how the science aligns with right behavior, kind of the way we were designed and instructed to do things. Yeah, one thing that really revolutionized our household was the notion that, and this is kind of the communication thing came out of this, is that not everything that happens in the household is necessarily my fault, but it's 100% my responsibility, right? And so that has to do with whether or not I'm equipping my kids to manipulate my wife, or if I'm equipping my wife to better parent and instruct my kids with my enforcement. Right. That goes down to communication, even our intimate life. Again, to go back to that, any aspect of the marriage, it's my responsibility. Like the buck stops with me. God is looking to me. My wife, whether she admits it or not, is looking to me to lead in that. And if I'm constantly having double think, or I am too timid to step into that, or I just, I don't know the answers, so I just never do it. And I'm only robbing my family of joy, my wife of peace, and my kids of a father that is there.
Dustin hit it so profoundly there. Like that is such a truth. If a man's not willing
Mm,
to step up and lead,
yeah.
it's chaos in the house. And I can tell you right now, my wife's Cajun and she's a firecracker, and my 3-year-old son is like biting off more than he could chew, and she's about to knife hand him. And I'm like, bro, like calm down, dude. I told you 15 times. So it's absolutely hilarious watching this little 3-year-old, like my strong-willed type A wife, get like absolutely beaten down by this kid, and I'm like, dude, chill out. So I step in and I'm like, the enforcer now, and I try not to let my wife, because she's 9 months pregnant and about to murder somebody. But it's it's absolutely funny though, because when I do step in, I notice he's starting to realize like, hey, daddy ain't playing. Like he doesn't mess with me, he messes with my wife, and then that's when I'm like, dude, you should not mess with her. She's the one that's scary. Like, but yeah, it's funny how that works. It's a crazy dynamic, and people don't realize until they're actually in it.
Yeah. Well, as a father, you're not just you're a proxy for a greater authority, right? And so I'm trying to teach, and I tell my girls my number one goal as their father is to maximize their joy, and that's why I am. That's why we do the things we do. That's why I discipline, because I know that if I can just teach you how to obey a loving father, because no human's going to love you more than me or my wife. That's what I'm telling them. Because you're a proxy for God. If they can learn to hear my voice, to obey my voice, to not complain and grumble when I ask them to do something they don't want to do, then they're going to grow into people that listen to God's voice, obey His voice, and don't complain and grumble when they got to go do something they don't want to do.
Yeah, it's so critical. That stat, Dustin, makes me want to like gag. That's the sad state of where we're at in this country, because it's really just a reflection on the man himself that you don't respect yourself enough to hold standards and boundaries, because discipline is just a mechanism. We hear that word and think it's punishment. It's very different. Punishment is like you did a crime, you're going to go do your time type of thing. But discipline is, hey, we're going to course correct to get you back towards being greater. So, yeah, men, that's your responsibility. Boy, that is a key thing we teach in Elite Sentinel. Dustin heard that one before? Anyway, so with that, Ryan, great input so far. But, we certainly have seen it. We get a lot of pushback, on social media and stuff from... It seems to be a very large number of men today kind of think marriage is a scam, or that, the system's rigged against them, or, there's no good women out there. There's lots more things that are said, and there's certainly lots of valid reasons for men to feel these ways. But I would love to kind of just broach that subject of, objectively as possible, is marriage actually worth it to the modern man? And I think you probably have better perspective than most, doing what you do and really kind of making this your business. So I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on the matter.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, there's a guy on X, and he has books he's written on this. His name is Brad Wilcox. It's all kind of data-driven stuff. I've not read his book, but I follow him, and he's got some really good insights in this regard. So some of what I'm about to say comes from his stuff.
Okay.
Is that you're asking the question, is marriage worth it? And empirically, across the board, 100%, it is worth it. Men who are married report being happier. They have higher incomes. They live longer. Every metric that matters in human existence is better when marriage is there. Now, here's the flip side of that coin: is that if you're in a horrible marriage, yeah, your life's going to suck. It's going to be really difficult. And now, so a lot of guys are seeing that, and they're just seeing the writing on the wall. And there's this statistic going around where 50% of marriages end in divorce. I happen to think that's not a right statistic. There's a lot of hyperbole around that. It's actually far less, but it's also even far less among practicing Christians. So I don't want to swallow that hook, line, and sinker. But yeah, just to answer simply that question is that yes, absolutely, it's better to be married than not to be married. And then you get into other questions like, okay, you're going to grow old, right? And are you going to grow old having bedded, 24 women over the course of your life? And maybe, had a few kids with those kids, and now you're paying a child. Like, what's the better alternative? You either are single, which that's, if you're called to that, so be it. Like 99.9% of guys aren't called to being single. And so I always encourage young guys, like, yes, go find a wife. Get in those places where there's going to be a good woman, right? You're not going to find a good woman in the slums. You're not going to find a good woman in the club. You're going to find a good woman in good places. So go find a good woman, get on the same page, make her your wife, and then build a life together. Because when you're 60, 70, 80, you're going to have a companion that you spent your whole life building a friendship with, building a history with, building a family with, building assets with, building and having memories to draw from. And then you're going to have kids that are going to be there for you. Like I said before, I have 4 daughters, and I always joke, like, I'm going to be a well cared for dying old man because they are all, they want to be nurses, right? And that's my favorite game to play, by the way, play doctor. And I just get to lay there and they get to just play. It's like the most passive interactive thing I can do when I'm tired.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's a great game. And real quick follow-up, because you kind of brought it up too. I have actually had Christian men kind of fire back at, threads I post or things I speak about on a podcast saying that, well, Paul was single. And I've kind of retorted that, like, okay, well, are you doing as much work for the kingdom as Paul was? Guys are real quick to kind of like cherry pick scripture to like explain away any of their faults, even with marriage, it seems, or their hesitation to do something. And it's kind of like, I could understand you having that sentiment if you were like really getting after it, but are you, So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that kind of, because I see it even with fitness, right? I will have Christian men quote scripture at me saying that I'm committing idolatry by being physically fit. And, and so there's lots of rabbit holes here, but I see this, it's a uniquely Christian male problem. I don't get this from, unbelievers to kind of push back. So the marriage is just one example, but, it's almost like using the scripture incorrectly to defend yourself being mediocre or being safe or something, right? And I'm just curious if you had any kind of, in your experiences, some thoughts on that as well, because I think this marriage issue is kind of tied to that.
Yeah. Yeah, sir. I mean, that's just kind of the human condition, right? We're really good at coping and finding excuses that make us feel better about our coping. But yeah, I think, obviously, so I don't spend a lot of time in I'll say the manosphere. Like, so I enjoy the fruits of the manosphere. I like your content, George, and Twitter and all that kind of stuff. But just in general, people love whatabouts. They love the whataboutisms. Like, what about Paul? What about Jesus? What about, and it's like, the trap there is, and I don't know about the fitness thing. That's a different maybe angle, but we tend to make the exceptions the norm. Like, it is normal and good for people to get married. Like, that's the normal thing to do. And like, quit trying to act like the exceptions are somehow they dismiss what the norm is and should be. It's just this really weird tactic. And so, yeah, I think just calling guys to the carpet, and if guys aren't honest, like, what can you do, right? If they're not being honest with you, they're not being honest with yourself, what can you do? Other than just live it and then, encourage them to live it too.